He did the impossible, 23-1 odds, dead last to first, capturing the roses and the hearts of millions. Golden Tempo was engineered for the Triple Crown. The world was screaming for a legend, but just 4 days later, his team did something that stunned the sports world, outraged racing purists, and changed horse racing forever. They walked away. How do you tell the world you're skipping the Preakness when immortality is staring you right in the face? Critics called it a corporate betrayal, a soft move that robbed fans of history, and a permanent stain on a brilliant colt's legacy. But behind closed doors, a silent revolution was taking place. This wasn't a retreat. It was a high-stakes, multi-million-dollar tactical gamble, a war between old-school, bone-crushing tradition and the raw, protective science of the modern elite athlete. 5 weeks later, beneath the historic elms of Saratoga, the ultimate verdict was delivered. Bypassing the middle jewel didn't destroy Golden Tempo. It weaponized him. By crushing the finest of his generation to become a dual classic champion, he silenced every doubter and drew a definitive line in the sand. But it leaves a burning question that divides the sport to this very day. Was this the greatest act of modern horsemanship we've ever witnessed? Or did it forever rob us of an immortal god of the turf? Let's dive deep into the real story behind why Golden Tempo missed the Triple Crown. Under the twin spires of Churchill Downs, destiny was rewritten in a heartbeat. The 152nd Kentucky Derby was supposed to belong to the giants of the division, leaving the 23-1 longshot Golden Tempo buried at the back of the pack. As the field thundered into the far turn, he trailed the entire 20-horse field, seemingly out of the equation entirely. Then the impossible happened. Jockey Jose Ortiz didn't just mount a rally, he launched a tactical revolution. Finding space along the rail, Golden Tempo ignited a breathtaking, furious acceleration that defied logic itself. With every stride, he devoured ground, weaving through a wall of elite thoroughbreds with razor-sharp precision. In a lung-searing final 16th, he locked eyes with the heavily favoured renegade and refused to flinch. By a defiant neck, Golden Tempo surged across the wire to seize the roses, shattering every handicapper's notebook in the process. In under 2 minutes, a superstar was born out of absolute chaos. The grandstands erupted as shock transformed into a collective, electrifying realization. The Triple Crown Trail had its chosen champion, and the racing world suddenly demanded immortality. But the intoxicating dream of a Triple Crown immediately collides with the sport's most brutal reality. The American Triple Crown is a relic of an era when thoroughbreds were bred for relentless endurance, demanding 3 grueling races across different tracks, distances, and states in a mere 5 weeks. The Pimlico bottleneck is where immortality goes to die. Asking a developing 3-year-old colt to empty his tank across 1¼ miles at Churchill Downs, ship across the country, and peak again just 14 days later is an astronomical physical toll. The science of the modern racehorse exposes the immense danger of this traditional schedule. In that brutal fortnight, a horse must flush systemic lactic acid, heal microscopic muscle tears, regain lost body weight, and mentally recover from the trauma of a 20-horse cavalry charge. Pushing an exhausted horse back into top-flight competition so quickly triggers catastrophic metabolic burnout and severe injury risk. For decades, traditionalists viewed the Preakness as a mandatory rite of passage, but modern equine sports medicine increasingly reveals it as a physiological minefield. The ultimate question shifted, not whether Golden Tempo could win the Preakness, but what irreversible price his body would pay for trying. On May 6, 2026, just 4 days after rewriting history as the first female trainer to capture the Kentucky Derby, Cherie DeVaux drew a definitive line in the sand, with the entire sports world breathlessly anticipating a Triple Crown sweep. DeVaux executed the ultimate power move, officially announcing that Golden Tempo would skip the Preakness Stakes. It was a revolutionary decision that stunned traditionalists and sent shockwaves through the racing industry. Standing at the absolute pinnacle of her career, she chose to absorb immense public scrutiny and fierce media backlash to protect the horse who had given her everything. This wasn't just a scheduling adjustment. It was a profound philosophical shift that completely upended the narrative of the 2026 racing season. DeVaux boldly challenged a century of rigid racing culture by refusing to sacrifice an elite athlete at the altar of public expectation. By placing Golden Tempo's physical welfare above immediate historic glory, she redefined what true horsemanship looks like in the modern era. Her defiance proved that greatness is not measured by blindly conforming to an archaic, grueling schedule, but by possessing the courage to map your own path to legendary status. In that singular, culture-shifting moment, DeVaux transformed from a history-making trainer into a fierce visionary, proving that a champion's longevity is worth infinitely more than a desperate shot at a fractured crown. For legendary ownership groups like Phipps Stable and Vinnie Viola's St. Elias Stable, the pursuit of the Triple Crown is always weighed against the cold, calculated reality of bloodstock economics. Golden Tempo was not just a fast horse, he was an irreplaceable genetic asset. Sired by the legendary two-time Horse of the Year Curlin and born out of the Grade 1 placed Phipps matriarch Carumba, his biological blueprint represented tens of millions of dollars in future stallion value. In the high-stakes boardroom of modern thoroughbred management, risking a flawlessly bred Kentucky Derby winner on a brutal 2-week turnaround at Pimlico is simply an unacceptable gamble. The ultimate prize was no longer a fleeting moment of glory in Baltimore. It was the preservation of a multi-million-dollar sire career. By bypassing the Preakness, the connections chose the lucrative path of longevity over the dangerous trap of immediate fame. A broken or exhausted colt can vanish from the commercial breeding market in an instant. Conversely, a healthy, dominant classic champion guarantees a legacy that spans generations at stud. The Phipps and St. Elias strategy perfectly exemplifies the corporate evolution of modern racing, where data, analytics, and equine welfare override archaic tradition. They understood that securing a fresh, dominant athlete for a massive summer campaign and a lifetime of elite breeding was the ultimate victory. By protecting their regally bred asset, they proved that true greatness isn't defined by chasing every headline. It's defined by building an enduring empire. Golden Tempo's absence from the Preakness was far more than a localized training choice. It was a definitive symptom of a massive, permanent tactical shift, reshaping the sport itself. By bypassing Pimlico, the colt became the second consecutive healthy Kentucky Derby winner, following Sovereignty the year prior, to willingly step away from a Triple Crown run. In decades past, skipping the middle jewel with a healthy Derby champion was a rare, deeply controversial anomaly. Today, it has matured into the emerging gold standard for the sport's most elite modern trainers. Equine management has fundamentally transitioned out of the shadow of rigid 20th century tradition and into an era dictated by data, sports medicine, and physiological preservation. This structural shift is causing the historic 5-week Triple Crown timeline to face its most severe existential challenge yet. The practice of forcing an elite 3-year-old through 3 maximum effort classic races in 35 days is increasingly recognized as unsustainable. Contemporary racing philosophy now prioritizes a minimum of 4 to 6 weeks between competitive starts to ensure full muscular and metabolic recovery. Golden Tempo's strategic rest didn't dilute his legacy. It signaled a bold new era, where patience is the ultimate weapon. By skipping the Preakness, Cherie DeVaux didn't just avoid a physical trap, she executed a flawless strategic masterstroke. Instead of enduring a rushed 2-week turnaround, Golden Tempo was granted a 5-week sanctuary of rest and precision preparation. For a deep closing athlete who expends an astronomical amount of energy in a single explosive late run, that extended recovery period was pure oxygen. It allowed his metabolic systems to fully reset, his muscles to rebuild, and his mind to heal from the chaos of Churchill Downs. DeVaux used this precious time to engineer a hyper-focused training regimen, meticulously tuning the colt to peak with lethal precision for the 158th running of the Test of the Champion. This strategy was further magnified by a historic twist, the Saratoga advantage. With Belmont Park undergoing major renovations, the 2026 Belmont Stakes was held at Saratoga Racecourse at a modified distance of 1¼ miles. This structural change transformed the race into a tactical dream for a rested, fresh-legged closer. DeVaux kept Golden Tempo isolated in a serene training environment, shielding him from the midsummer heat and shipping stress that drained his rivals. While the rest of the 3-year-old division arrived at Saratoga battered and exhausted from the relentless Triple Crown trail, Golden Tempo stepped onto the track as a fully loaded high-octane machine, completely fresh, perfectly dialed in, utterly lethal. On June 6, 2026, the ultimate moment of truth arrived beneath the historic elms of Saratoga. Critics and skeptics had spent weeks openly dismissing Golden Tempo's Derby triumph as a chaotic fluke, a lucky trip engineered by a suicidal pace that simply collapsed in his favour. The 158th Belmont Stakes was supposed to expose him. As the gates crashed open, the nightmare scenario immediately unfolded. The early pace was agonisingly slow, a tactical crawl that heavily favoured the frontrunners and left deep closers completely compromised. Yet what followed was a magnificent masterclass in raw power and pure redemption. Refusing to panic, Jose Ortiz anchored the colt at the back of the pack, waiting with ice-cold patience until the far turn to unleash him. When Ortiz gave the cue, Golden Tempo exploded with a devastating, awe-inspiring turn of foot. Without a fast pace to soften the leaders, he simply overmatched them through sheer, unadulterated brilliance. Sweeping 4 wide into the stretch, he relentlessly wore down a stubborn commandment and a resurgent renegade before drawing clear with absolute authority, winning the Test of the Champion by 1¼ lengths. By conquering an unfavourable pace scenario and decimating the finest of his generation, he silenced every critic in that grandstand. This wasn't survival, this was domination. Yet across the landscape of American racing, a deeply passionate community of traditionalists viewed Golden Tempo's absence from Baltimore as a tragic betrayal of the sport's highest ideals. To the racing purist, the Triple Crown is not a series of isolated events to be mathematically managed. It is a sacred, unyielding test of ultimate athletic fortitude. By intentionally removing the Kentucky Derby champion from the Preakness Stakes, the connections fractured the singular, electrifying narrative that captures the imagination of the casual sports world. The sport survives on the chase for a legendary sweep, and denying the public that journey robs horse racing of its most powerful mainstream appeal. The core of the purist argument rests on a foundational philosophy. True equine immortality must be earned through adversity, not insulation. Legends like Secretariat, Citation, and Affirmed are not revered simply because they were fast, but because they conquered the brutal, non-negotiable reality of the 2-week turnaround. Critics argue that protective management sanitizes the classics, lowering the historical bar of greatness to accommodate modern fragility by prioritizing long-term commercial stallion value over the historic pursuit of the middle jewel. Golden Tempo's team chose a safe corporate strategy over a date with destiny. For the traditionalists, no matter how brilliantly the colt performed at Saratoga, his legacy will forever carry an asterisk. He remains a phenomenal racehorse who captured 2 classic crowns, but by skipping the ultimate crucible, he surrendered his chance to sit among the immortal gods of the turf. The definitive verdict on Golden Tempo's legacy transcends the simplistic constraints of an archaic trophy. While traditionalists will always mourn the tantalizing what-if of a classic sweep, history will judge Cherie DeVaux' strategy as a masterstroke of modern horsemanship. He did not fail the Triple Crown. He conquered his era entirely on his own terms. In a sport rapidly evolving away from blind compliance with grueling schedules, a pristine, dominant dual classic champion holds infinitely more cultural and economic value than a broken, exhausted Triple Crown aspirant. By prioritizing physiological recovery over public nostalgia, his connections didn't just build a multi-million-dollar stallion empire. They pioneered a revolutionary blueprint for the preservation of the elite thoroughbred. His explosive closing kicks silenced the skeptics, permanently validating a new era where patience is weaponized to achieve maximum excellence. Golden Tempo walks away from the classic trail not with an asterisk, but with an unassailable crown of his own making, a towering symbol of visionary management and pure, unadulterated power, a champion who proved that guarding an athlete's future is the truest victory of all. If Golden Tempo's historic journey proved anything, it's that true greatness requires the courage to break the mold. Do you think skipping the Preakness was a masterstroke of modern horsemanship? Or did it rob us of a racing legend? Sound off in the comments below. If you love deep dive racing analysis, high stakes sports strategy, and the stories behind the world's greatest athletes, hit that subscribe button, smash the like icon, and turn on notifications. Don't miss our next breakdown. Join the community and stay ahead of the track.